bit of a mystery and nobody was quite sure where she was.
It was horrific. It was just very frightening.
I cannot comprehend the mind of a person who can do that.
This was the worst case scenario. It's the result that we all feared.
He had stripped her of her clothing, tried to wash any trace of him from her body, which makes the murder even more chilling.
It was so gruesome. It's just unbearable to think what that poor woman went through.
I think a lot of people are in shock. This has happened in a place that is so sleepy.
A spring day in Walton-on-Thames, Surrey.
Hello, police. How can I help?
I was working in my office and the two investigators in the missing persons unit made me aware that we had a missing girl, Kate Beagley. She had not turned up to work and this was completely out of character.
She was someone who kept in touch with friends and family on a regular basis. So the father obviously began to get worried.
He knew that she'd been out the evening before and hadn't heard from her at all on Thursday.
Her father had gone to her house and found that she'd missed an appointment with a maintenance worker.
So he took the decision to report her as missing. There's a belief that if somebody's missing for less than 24 hours, then police aren't interested. That's absolutely not the case. Every missing person case will be considered on its own merits. We look at people's previous behaviour, we look at any vulnerabilities. But with somebody like Kate, we don't wait 24 hours. Action's undertaken immediately.
While Surrey police begin the hunt for Kate, her friends also launch into action. They set up a Facebook group appealing for information and put up missing posters all over town.
The first time I knew there was something wrong, my husband and I went to get a ticket for the car and saw the poster up that she was missing. And that sort of real feeling of fear.
It was actually stuck to the car park ticket machine, and it was just a real shock.
It was horrific, absolutely horrific. It was just very frightening. It seemed very unlike Kate to not be in contact with anybody, to sort of have a gap of time of not speaking to anybody. So to go missing and not be in contact with family or friends is just not Kate. It was just not her character. So we knew when she went missing, it was serious. We then decided we must get in contact with her friends, and then we realised they were already starting the search party, and we got involved with helping with the searching.
Networking out to people I knew in the area, and then going around putting some posters up around in different places where they hadn't been. We were going to do what we could to find her.
The local press is also enlisted in the desperate hunt for Kate.
I got the phone call initially. I think it was from one of her friends. And as a local reporter, this is what we're here for. You know, the point is the local paper is part of the community. We're connected to the community. For me, any sort of missing person is a really important and vital part of our job to help spread the word and hopefully find the person. We recognised that it was going to be a big story and one that we desperately wanted to cover to try to help find her. And I went down to the scene and looked at some of the posters and just tried to see if I could get a handle on what might have happened to her. Was kind of trying to chat to neighbours, etc., to know if they had any extra details, etc.
Then we just all did our best to find out what happened. There were people already driving around the area.
Even back then, when Facebook wasn't really a big thing, it was getting a lot of traction, and the posters were getting a lot of traction as well. So there was obviously a lot of concern. And at the time, it was all a bit of a mystery, and nobody was quite sure where she was.
And you could really feel a sense of shock and panic in those people that had come together to try and help find Kate when she first disappeared. It didn't strike us at the time that she would be the type of person that would simply just disappear like this.
To those who know Kate, she's a dependable friend.
She wasn't just anybody. She was special, caring, kind.
She was always bright, very friendly, big beaming smile.
She was attractive, but she had no ego. Yeah, a beautiful soul.
At just 32, she's risen to a senior position in a national FTSE 100 company.
She was quite a high flyer. She was really going somewhere in her career. She had quite a wide group of friends. She was very, very loyal.
Her disappearance is out of the ordinary for her leafy hometown of Walton-on-Thames.
The whole kind of area was very affluent. A lot of detached properties, gated properties, very quiet and sleepy. Lots of well-to-do people, really.
People who live in the neighbourhood tend to know each other, tend to recognise each other. It isn't, by any stretch of the imagination, a crime hotspot. It's not where you would hear the backdrop of sirens, and it's not a place that's big on drama.
Just one major disappearance in Walton has in recent years hit the headlines. The 2002 abduction and killing of 13-year-old Millie Dowler.
We did feel a little bit of pressure at the beginning of the investigation, not just because you want to find Kate alive and well, but of course Walton-on-Thames is where Millie Dowler disappeared from. And it was very much a case that we wanted to reassure the community and even to show to the Dowler family and Kate's family that we were doing everything that we could to find Kate.
So behind the scenes, police are desperate to trace Kate's whereabouts. Soon they uncover something rather sinister.
Her friends had told them that they'd been receiving text messages from her phone that they felt were not from her. They said that words were being used that they didn't think she would use, and phrases, and they just felt they knew her style of texting, and they were adamant it wasn't her.
As detectives search Kate's property, they uncover another curious lead.
I believe another phone was found, a spare phone, at her home address. As a result of that, some numbers were obtained which became of interest. The Missing Persons Unit investigators were ringing some of these numbers that they got without knowing who they were going to speak to.
Police home in on one recently dialed number.
That number turned out to belong to somebody who we believe she had gone on a date the previous evening with. So, assuming they met, then would be one of the last people to have seen Kate, if not the last person.
Kate's friends know little about this mysterious date.
I think we knew that the boyfriend's name was Carl, but that was about all we knew. I don't think we knew his surname. All we knew was that she met him a few weeks before at a nightclub in London. We would be thinking that maybe she had gone back home with him, but from what we heard from her family and her friends, that was really unlikely and not in character for her. So although we knew there was a person called Carl that she'd been on the date with, we weren't able to find an address for him or an employment or anything to easily find him.
But on Kate's newly found phone, police find texts from the man himself.
He had texted and she had texted to set up the date that she went on.
So detectives dial the number.
They actually spoke to Carl, who had been the man that she'd arranged to meet on a date.
It was, Kate's missing, can you help? Because we think you saw her on Wednesday. So that initial contact with him was very low-key. So Carl's initial explanation was that he did meet with Kate on Wednesday. She had dropped him off at Twickenham in her car. And as far as he knew, she was heading home.
And afterwards he'd gone back home again on the bus.
Investigators now have the man's full name, Carl Taylor. And as they dig deeper, his story about getting the bus home doesn't seem to stack up.
On one of these calls, they also spoke to Carl Taylor's mother. His mother had told them that he had turned up on the early hours of the 31st of May with a new car that she hadn't seen before. And he told her that he got it from a woman and gave some story about he was cleaning the car, and she asked him why, and he said he was cleaning it because she needed it to take the kids to school or something like that. This really raised the flag.
What he was saying just wasn't adding up.
Walton-on-Thames, Surrey. 32-year-old Kate Beagley has suddenly gone missing, sparking off a frantic search by friends and family, desperate for news of her whereabouts. Detectives have called a number in her phone, belonging to a man she dated before she disappeared. Carl Taylor.
This Carl Taylor, who she'd seen, the last person to see her, had somehow acquired a new car.
Police national computer checks reveal this car belongs to Kate.
Her car had been seen going north over Chiswick Bridge, driving erratically just before midnight on the 30th of May. An officer had seen the car and done a PNC check on it, and that was logged, and when they checked her car, this PNC check came up. So that worried us, because obviously she'd not got home, she couldn't be contacted, she was supposed to have gone straight home afterwards, but her car is going in the wrong direction.
Now Carl Taylor becomes the prime focus in Kate's missing case.
When somebody becomes of interest in a missing person inquiry in a way that suggests that some harm might have come to somebody, of course we will do all the background checks that we need to. On police intelligence databases, on partner agencies, whether we think there's a possibility of intelligence from elsewhere, we will always seek as much background information as we can about somebody. We knew that he had qualifications in terms of PE and martial arts and had worked as a football coach, so clearly a very physical man, a physically active man. From the intelligence checks that were undertaken, he had a minor conviction, was known to police for other activity.
With this news, the missing persons investigators need to call Taylor again, and urgently.
So I asked them to get back in touch with Carl Taylor to arrange for us to interview and speak to him. But throughout that day, they were not able to get a reply. It was getting towards the end of the officer's shift, and they still hadn't managed to get through to him. I just had a hunch that this guy was not answering the phone because he could see that they were withheld numbers, and that he figured, already having had one phone call that morning, that it was the police trying to get back in touch with him. So I just took a chance and thought I'll give this a go and try it with my phone, and fortunately he fell for it. And he gave a similar account to what he told the guys that morning. I wasn't happy. He seemed evasive. He was a bit vague on detail. It was a bit difficult to get an account from him. So I said to him we would need to take a statement from him, and I arranged for two other officers to go up to London to see him.
Bizarrely, Taylor asks the investigators to meet him at a party that evening in London's Holland Park. So detectives hightail it to the venue.
Carl Taylor was there, and they took him into a room where they could speak to him. But they, like me, found him evasive, and they weren't happy with what he was saying.
His demeanour, his general evasiveness, some of the irregularities in the answers that he was giving when they started to probe did cause concern with the officers.
And this went on for a while, and more people were arriving at the flat, and alcohol was being drunk, and they were beginning to get a bit uncomfortable with the situation. They were reporting back to me at Walton, and they were saying that Carl was beginning to get a bit tetchy, and they were a bit concerned for themselves. So I said to them, right, you need to arrest him on suspicion of kidnapping and bring him back to Surrey. But I was a bit worried for their safety, so I contacted the Mets and asked them to attend to be there as backup if needed.
But in the meantime, Mark's team on the ground come up with a wily plan.
The detective sergeant made some excuse to Carl to get him to come out of the flat and go down to the car. And once he was in the car with him, they arrested him for kidnapping. They brought him back to Surrey and he was put into a cell for the night. And I handed over the investigation to the Major Crime Investigation Team.
Detective Chief Inspector Mark Preston is now leading the case.
The solicitors then arranged, and we start then planning for an interview of Carl. Those interviews were urgent because this wasn't about solving a crime so much as finding Kate. There was no real variation on his story at that time which would have helped us find Kate. But nonetheless, we now had a person who we thought could have caused harm to Kate.
It's now 2 days since Kate was reported missing, and there's still no word from her.
We decided to arrest him on suspicion of murder. It's right that anybody understands the most serious allegations against them, and because now we had real concerns that something untoward had happened to Kate, I took the decision that he needed to be arrested for murder. Taylor decided to respond no comment to all of the questions being asked of him following his arrest for murder, which I think in anybody raises suspicions that we're trying to find a young lady here. We want to know that she's safe and well. Even if some harm has been caused, let's at least find her safe and well. And just to go no comment during an interview really does cause concern, I think, for anybody.
Although it looks suspicious to any hearer, is frequently as a result of a solicitor doing his duty and advising the client really to keep his powder dry for the moment.
But Taylor doesn't break his silence.
Carl was interviewed throughout Saturday and Sunday. We had attended court to obtain an extension because we needed more time with him in custody. So all the time the interviews were happening, of course we were trying to find things that we could use during the interview. We were trying to find evidence of wrongdoing on his part. All the time trying desperately to find Kate. It's fair to say that he protested his innocence throughout by going no comment, had made it clear to the officers between interviews, I've got nothing to do with this. So he was compliant, but absolutely not accepting any responsibility for anything that had happened to Kate, but also not assisting in trying to find Kate.
Police question their suspect about his use of Kate's car that he claimed to his mother was his. They also show Taylor damning CCTV of him refueling it.
There was the bizarre filling up with £1 of petrol at Shepherd's Bush service station, and then he was obviously very proud of its ownership and was showing off his ownership of a car belonging to Kate.
We had been obtaining evidence that really added weight to our suspicions that Taylor had done something of harm to Kate, which is why she was now missing.
Taylor had also given his mum Marks and Spencer vouchers. Background checks showed these belonged to Kate.
Carl Taylor was confronted with the amount of evidence that the police had, particularly his possession of the car and the extraordinary use of the Marks and Spencer vouchers given to his mother at 6:15 in the morning.
But still the suspect refuses to give up his silence. He's then sent back to his cell.
People are allowed phone calls when they're in custody. It was late on the Sunday that he asked for another phone call and spoke to his mother on the phone. And that's in private. He came away from that telephone call, and our intention was to put one further interview into him that evening, which we did. I had been awake since the morning before, since Saturday, and I had literally just put my head on the pillow to go to sleep that evening, and had a phone call from one of the interviewing officers who explained that Carl Taylor had just confessed to the murder of Kate Beagley. He would take us to where Kate now was.
"27-year-old Carl Taylor has been arrested on suspicion of murder. His victim, 32-year-old Kate Beagley, whom he killed after meeting on a date. Following 2 days of staying silent, Taylor finally caves in.
Carl told us in that interview that he had killed Kate, that he had stabbed her more than once because she was defending herself by trying to attack his face. All he wanted was her car, and that's why he had initially attacked her. I don't think any of the investigation team really believed that. Given Taylor's physical background, his qualifications in PE, his martial arts training, physically he was far stronger than Kate and would have been able to overcome Kate with relative ease. He had all the attributes in the world to overcome Kate and steal her car without using a weapon. Nobody believed that as his true explanation of what happened.
But the top priority for detectives now is to finally find Kate. Her killer claims she's somewhere in Hertfordshire.
We have somebody in custody who's saying, yes, I'm going to take you to where a body is. So in very short time, we spoke to Hertfordshire, the police, because we knew he was taking us somewhere near Watford. And we had a whole convoy of police vehicles ready to go. Something like 11 vehicles on the road. The plans were that we would record Carl throughout the journey. So we obtained the services of an evidence gatherer who was videoing throughout. Of course, we had to take his solicitor with us and make sure that they were safe, that there was no chance of escape for Carl, and then the resources to be able to deal with any scene if he was now telling the truth and we were going to go and find Kate's body.
In the dead of night, the police convoy sets off, with their suspect guiding the way.
We then ran in convoy around the M25 heading up towards Watford, with Carl giving us directions and take us into a beauty spot car park called Oxley Woods. It was pitch black. It was a small car park with an entrance barrier. It was very isolated and secluded. We stopped the vehicles outside the car park because we didn't know what evidence may still be in there. And Carl led us towards the middle of the car park, and we asked him then to stop and to tell us where Kate was. He pointed to a bank of singing nettles. My role was to make sure that the integrity of the investigation was there. You have to consider what evidence might be in the bank of singing nettles. We had an officer go around the back of the stinging nettles and walk in a route that no offender would have taken. And as he was coming through that bank, he called out, "Yes, there's a body here." I cannot explain the mixed feelings that I had. There was a real sense of relief that, yes, we found Kate's body. But then there was a real sense of loss, if you like, if you're on a human scale, that this was the worst case scenario for Kate's family, for her friends. It's the result that we all feared, but none of us wanted. So there were very much competing emotions when the officer confirmed that he'd found a body.
Meanwhile, Taylor's taken back to the police car, while officers secure the crime scene.
it must have been pre-planned because it was such a convenient, isolated spot where the body had obviously been for a number of days without anyone realizing. It wouldn't just be happenstance that he'd managed to put her dead body in some nettles in a secluded place by chance. He must have recognised it, which makes the murder even more chilling.
Kate had been stabbed in the neck more than 30 times.
We couldn't identify Kate immediately. The reasons for that were some of the injuries that had been inflicted on her. Unfortunately, it was a very hot period that summer, and we couldn't physically confirm that it's Kate due to some body decomposition. So we had to wait for DNA results and later dental comparisons to confirm that yes, it's Kate.
There was very little evidence at all, apart from Kate's naked body, because it then transpired that he had stripped her of her clothing, tried to wash any trace of him from her body.
There was literally nothing else. Her vehicle wasn't there. None of her possessions that we could find were there. Search teams assisted with fingertip searches around the whole area to try and find any evidence to confirm that Carl had taken her there. We found no murder weapon, we found no property belonging to Kate, and we found nothing belonging to Carl Taylor, and we found nothing that would link to. At that time, the only evidence that we had was Carl Taylor's confession, which we'd obtained on video in the car park.
The spot where her body was found is now marked by a police tent. It's about 50 yards from the main road here. This is an area known locally as a nature reserve. It's just next to a private housing estate. The woods themselves are popular with joggers and dog walkers.
The next day, this tragic news reaches Kate's hometown, Walton-on-Thames.
I'd been down in the community trying to get some information, and then the news came from the police that they'd found the body.
We didn't know at first that it had been Kate's. I understand it took some time for the post-mortem to identify her, but I think when we heard that a body had been found close to where police had been searching, we all immediately feared the worst, and sadly that turned out to be true.
Kate's friends, Heather and Tony, soon learn of the horrific developments.
Well, when we heard the news, it was desperate shock, and it was just what an absolute devastating loss.
It was so gruesome, so horrific. To think that she went through that is unbearable. It's just unbearable to think what that poor woman went through.
I just cannot comprehend the mind of a person who can do that. It's beyond me.
And I can't imagine what her family went through. It's the worst pain, particularly as a parent, to have your life just taken away in a moment, you know, without a care in the world from the other person is devastating.
It was a murder investigation, and that was tough for everyone, and I think also for the community those who didn't know her or didn't know the case might have seen the posters. That's a big shock for everyone. A lot of people didn't quite know how to handle the fact that this has happened in a place that is so sleepy.
We had a page that was inundated with people coming on and giving their sympathies, either for the family or expressing their own sorrow, or in quite a lot of cases, people coming on who had read about the case, who didn't know Kate, but were still shocked and touched by what I guess her friends and her family had said about her.
Kate's killer, meanwhile, has continued to help police with their inquiries. His next offering is Kate's car, last seen by police speeding into West London.
We had no idea where the vehicle was. So Carl taking us to the car was a boost for the investigation. We knew that there was going to be evidence in the car connecting Taylor and Kate together.
So it's down the M1 to Harlesden, to a housing estate where police believe Taylor has acquaintances. Here, detectives finally find Kate's car.
There were vouchers in there which kind of suggested that Carl had been using the car for a day or so. There were Marks and Spencer vouchers which he had given to his mum. There was property missing. So certainly finding the car and the evidence from it was certainly a very useful part of that jigsaw.
Finally, the suspect leads police to Richmond Hill, to the pub he met Kate in on that fateful evening, and across the road to a slope overlooking the Thames.
Carl took us straight to a bench on which he said is where the attack took place. There was markings in the grass that very much looked like blood staining. There was blood staining heading up the steps towards the roadway where the pub was. There were what looked like blood smears on some hand guardrails. It did look like Taylor had been telling us the truth, that that's where Kate was killed.
Investigators secure this final crime scene, and soon the blood is confirmed as Kate's.
Heather and I decided to go to Richmond to see where Kate had took her last few breaths.
It was lovely to see all the flowers and the tributes and the letters, and it was beautiful. It was a shrine, really, for Kate. It was very, very beautiful. I remember just breaking down, just completely broke down. And there were some lovely flowers, and really brings it up. It was quite heart-rendering.
Carl Taylor is finally charged with Kate's brutal murder. But 3 months later, at a pre-trial hearing, Taylor stuns the court with a not guilty plea.
Taylor had changed his explanation from one of murder to one of self-defense stroke suicide.
The police and prosecution will now unexpectedly have to prove Taylor's guilt.
He basically suggested that Kate took her own life and I'm the victim. That change was quite remarkable in the face of quite overwhelming evidence.
Richmond, Surrey. Fitness instructor Carl Taylor has been charged with the murder of 32-year-old Kate Beagley. Taylor stole his victim's car, then used it to dump Kate's body near Watford. He's admitted to discarding her belongings on his way home to London.
Taylor had thrown the murder weapon onto an embankment at the hard shoulder on the M1 southbound after he had dumped Kate. Our search team officers literally combed the embankment for quite a few miles to try and find the weapon and any other property that they could. They did find the weapon. Along with that were some items of Kate's clothing. There were bottles of water, which we knew Kate habitually kept in her car, which transpires that it was some of those bottles that Taylor had used to wash Kate's body. Certainly things that linked that scene back to Kate's car.
Through DNA testing, Kate's blood is confirmed on the recovered knife. But as Taylor's now pleading not guilty, investigators need to build their case. They look for more proof where Kate's body was uncovered.
We did everything we could to show that this was a sexually motivated murder, which had been affirmed to a certain extent by the fact that Kate was found naked. The forensic officers and the search team officers had to deal with certainly over 100 used condoms, all of which had to be seized in case it could prove evidence of sexual activity between Taylor and Kate. We couldn't find any evidence of sexual activity. So it was very much then for the judge to consider later whether or not they believed it was sexually motivated.
Barely 9 months after Kate's horrific killing, Taylor's trial begins at London's imposing Old Bailey.
You know, they don't send every case to the Old Bailey, so for it to be in the Bailey showed not only the magnitude of the crime, but also the interest. You had national journalists and agency workers all in the court as well. Something that you're not always used to as a local reporter, to have a full press bench and everyone, you know, tapping away and writing their notes is very different to what you're used to.
The case attracted a high degree of publicity in the public gallery. It was full, which puts pressure on everyone.
Prosecution barrister Peter Clark leads the Crown's case against Carl Taylor.
Formally, Carl Taylor had pleaded not guilty at an early hearing, and I assumed that it was likely that he would change his plea, but that was not the case. The evidence against him was so overwhelming.
So it left us scratching our heads as to what kind of defence he could come up with.
I opened the case to the jury, explaining to them that as far as the Crown's case was concerned, Carl Taylor had admitted the killing and had admitted disposing of the body.
We have to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt that Carl Taylor murdered Kate Beagley rather than anything else. Beyond reasonable doubt is a high bar to achieve.
The prosecution starts by taking the jury back to when the couple met for their first fateful date on Richmond Hill.
We know that Carl and Kate had met on the 18th of May at CC's club in London, had exchanged telephone numbers and had arranged to meet then on Wednesday the 30th of May.
There were witnesses who remember them in the Roebuck public house in Richmond overlooking the River Thames.
Then it seems Kate's persuaded to continue the date across the road to public gardens overlooking the Thames.
Carl Taylor had planned this in advance, underlined by the fact that he'd gone on this first date with a carving knife up his sleeve and also a pair of scissors, with presumably the intention of using it on Kate and not just threatening her.
Our contention all the way that this was a sexually motivated attack, that he had a knife with him, one could suppose, in order to force sexual offences to happen.
But in a sudden frenzied attack by Taylor, Kate is mercilessly stabbed 31 times in the neck, head and face.
There was no evidence that Carl Taylor had sexually assaulted Kate Beagley. Plainly, he had had no opportunity to seriously sexually assault her before he stabbed her.
The killer takes Kate's body back to her car, then chillingly packs her up into her own boot. The CCTV shows Taylor calmly refueling her Volkswagen, with Kate herself hidden inside.
The route that Taylor took that evening was from Richmond via Chiswick Bridge, heading round London onto the M1 and up towards Watford and Oxley Woods,
where he callously dumps Kate's body before bizarrely washing it.
Taylor explained to us that he wanted to clean her in a spiritual sense and leave her open to the stars. That's his explanation of why he cleaned Kate's body. The cynic would suggest it was to try and get rid of any forensic evidence.
Next, it's the turn of Carl Taylor's defence. The man himself takes to the stand.
By the time he goes into the witness box, all the evidence of the confession, of the use of the car, the finding of the weapon, was all before the jury. So he had, and his barrister had, I'd say, the uphill task of trying to explain away all those matters
He tried to build this picture of Kate being a very kind but somehow troubled individual, and she had decided to take her own life.
That Kate had attacked herself after bringing a knife to the scene, and Taylor had done nothing but try to help and try to intervene to stop Kate killing herself, and that he was in no position then to call for an ambulance or anything like that.
It was clear that Kate couldn't have stabbed herself that many times and remained standing, and he just didn't seem to recognise that.
The account that he gave of her suicide was not just unbelievable. It was an extraordinary thing to happen in the witness box, and it was why I felt entitled to roll up a piece of paper and invite Carl Taylor to show the judge and the jury how she managed to stab herself in the face so many times.
Initially, he refused. He said, I'm not going to do that.
Indeed, the judge said, Mr. Taylor, you're not in charge of this court and what evidence you give. I am. Will you please answer the question?
And he gave an embarrassing show of attempting to use this knife to somehow stab himself. He sort of weakly just sort of stabbed at his neck a couple of times before putting it down.
Carl Taylor effectively did no more than prod himself. It was quite clear that Taylor had been asked to demonstrate something which he had never seen.
And you could see the defence, just ridiculous as it was, but in that moment it crumbled.
When the jury retired to consider their verdict, I felt confident that we would have a guilty verdict, but certainly not 100% confident.
As a prosecutor, you always nurse a fear in the pit of your stomach that someone you regard as obviously guilty is going to be acquitted.
But the jury took less than 2 hours to return a guilty verdict.
Carl Taylor is later sentenced to life for a minimum of 30 years. Outside court, Kate's father reacts to the sentence.
I speak for us all when I say our lives will never be the same again. Our family has been devastated and life seems empty and meaningless without Kate.
After the trial ended, they took us to a pub at the end of the road, just to say thank you. It was a dad who led it, but we as a group of officers were given a standing ovation in the pub, and was the most humbling experience I've ever had. So yeah, it was justice for them. And decided to take a walk and walked along the embankment and just kind of reflected on whether it was something I wanted to carry on doing. But my experience at the trial and knowing that Carl Taylor was in prison for at least 30 years, and Kate's family and friends now know what happened to her, that made it worthwhile.
I saw something in the distance on the ground. As I got closer, I realised it was actually
a body lying there, somebody lying there.
She had been brutally attacked and hit multiple times over the head with a heavy blunt object.
In all my years of policing service, I've never seen an injury as horrific as this.
When I first got there, I saw a tiny village with police everywhere.
We even had the helicopter up. We had a phenomenal amount of search teams, 60 to 70 officers on the scene every single day. There was a whole sea of blue.
It was clear the police were desperate for any information, anything that could bring them a suspect.
The identity of this person was unknown. It was 7 days into the investigation. I had no idea who was responsible for this.
It wasn't known if it was an isolated incident, and there was fear in the local community.
Whoever had done that clearly could strike again at any time.
In Kent, not far from Dover, lies the small hamlet of Snowdown.
You get just a few miles out of Dover and it's extremely quiet and extremely rural, and people really would go there to get away from the hustle and bustle of city life.
It's tiny, it's a little community, a few houses surrounded by typical Kent countryside, greenery and forest.
It's a very rural area, lots of fields, lots of woodland, and Aylsham is just next door.
I was born here, so I've lived here my whole life, it's 27 years. It's my family home, and we're sort of a couple of generations here as well. Yeah, it's quite a tight community, and you do recognise people when you're walking around the village.
I've been working here for 6 years, and I wave to everybody. People are very friendly. This village is a textbook, a chocolate box village.
It's quite a close-knit community because it's an old mining village. I think everyone tends to know a lot about each other in this village.
Snowdown's the kind of place where it doesn't take a lot to make front page news. The local paper is going to carry news about local fates and things that matter to local people.
There's some rural crime in this area, maybe burglaries and thefts from businesses, things like that, but nothing of significance, no. We'd been out to a local pub, and when we got back about 2:30, myself and my son and daughter decided to go for a walk. It was a really nice sunny day, quite warm for April. We went on a walk that we often do across the fields locally, then do a bit of a loop. It takes about 45 minutes to do the walk. That takes us down to a small wood, half a mile from our house. A very, very pretty little area. The first thing we saw as we went down through the woods was the dog. With Jack Russell, which was on its own. We couldn't see the owner. First off, my daughter managed to get hold of the dog, but the dog wasn't running away or anything. It actually looked a bit scared. I then walked through to the next field to see if I could see anyone. I couldn't see anyone there. I then crossed the footpath to another field, and that's how I saw something sort of in the distance on the ground. It just looked like some clothing, just something colourful a little bit in the distance. I then walked along the side of the field, and as I got closer, I realised it was actually a body lying there, somebody lying there. I called to my son to say, something's happened here. The obvious thing was it was someone who'd collapsed, had a heart attack, something like that. As we looked a bit closer, we realised it was a woman. The jacket hood was over the head and they were face down, so we couldn't actually see anything amiss, really. We called out to see if there was any response, but there was nothing. So then we crouched down next to her and we could tell that there was no movement, so we assumed that they were not alive. We immediately called 999.
The call was made into Kent Police at about 8 minutes past 4 on that day. Then the first police response was at 4:30, where an initial examination of the body took place.
When the woman's hood is pulled back, police are shocked to see the extent of her injuries.
She had sustained significant and catastrophic head injuries. In all my years of policing service, I've never seen an injury as horrific as this. The pathologist said that he couldn't specifically say how many blows there were because of the significant trauma, but he said, it could have been up to 10 or more.
Which really gives you an idea of the ferocity of the attack.
What the pathologist did say to me, and I distinctly remember him saying this, was, "Gavin, you are looking for something linear, cylindrical, and really heavy on one end." That's what we needed to find.
The woman who has suffered this frenzied and brutal attack is named as 53-year-old Snowdown resident Julia James.
Julia James was a much-loved mother and wife.
She was a lady who had lived in and around Aylsham for all of her life. She was a very, very popular member of the community.
She was a greatly loved mother and grandmother and a very highly regarded and respected PCSO for many years.
Julia joined Kent Police on the 26th of August 2008, where she was a police community support officer.
A passion for her and a real talent was supporting victims of domestic violence. She was really respected for her work, but also as a member of the community herself.
Because Julia was well known in the area, I had personally met her once through my business, so she was a well-known local police officer, yeah.
Julia's body was found in a very rural location, bordering on to Ackholt Wood, which falls between Snowdown and Aylsham. We cordoned off the area, preserving any evidence that could be in there so it can't be contaminated in any way. I made the decision that Julia's body was to be recovered. In fact, when I went to see Julia's family, that was one of the questions that I was asked. Did my mum spend all night out there? And she didn't.
The investigation is immediately presented with challenges.
There is no CCTV. There might be some witness opportunities in the form of walkers, but then there might not have been. And that really restricts you to what you're going to do. You then start thinking, right, OK, we've got to get ourselves into gear here. This was a huge investigation.
When I first got there, I saw a tiny village with police everywhere. There were police cars lining the streets. You could see people wearing forensic suits in the field nearby.
Well, I was working here in this unit on the farm, and I was aware of a strange sound in the farmyard I had not heard before. I opened the door, and it was a police sweep. It was a line of police officers sweeping across the farmyard.
In the first day's investigation, police were everywhere trying to find any clues they could about what had happened to Julia. Whether this was police officers on the ground, they were leaving no stone unturned.
There were two CID who spotted me straight away and said, "Have you heard anything unusual? Have you seen any unusual vehicles?" When they interviewed me, they basically wanted to know where I was that day, whether I was here looking for an alibi.
Even those closest to Julia find themselves under police scrutiny, including her husband Paul.
I was very open and honest with him when I met him, knowing full well that in the background there's these inquiries going on. I told him, and I said that he needed to know. He became very emotional at that point, but he had every right to know that we were doing those inquiries, especially in light of the fact that everybody always thinks it's the husband. But with all my experience over the years, I was very comfortable it wasn't Paul.
With pressure mounting on detectives and the killer still at large, Fear is spreading through the village.
It's not just perceived danger, it is real danger because, whoever had done that clearly could strike again at any time. And until that person is caught, people will be living in fear.
At this point, it wasn't known if it was an isolated incident, and there was fear in the local community.
And absolutely right that they had their genuine concerns. Would this person strike again?
In the quiet village of Snowdown in Kent, locals are distraught at the news of the death of their neighbour and local PCSO, Julia James.
She'd just gone out for a walk with her dog when she had been brutally attacked and hit multiple times over the head with a heavy blunt object. She'd done a lot of great work within the force, particularly in the area of domestic violence. So by all accounts, she was a lovely lady. And I think, when you start building up a picture of who the victim is, it makes the horror of what's happened to her feel even greater.
As police and the media descend on the area, the village is gripped by the fear that a killer could be in their midst.
This was a tight-knit community that was then suddenly faced with this police operation after one of their beloved neighbours had been brutally attacked. There wasn't a lot of information out and about at the time. People didn't know if this was something that could be repeated.
There was quite a lot of fear in the village, particularly when the press and all the television cameras turned up. I think it made everyone very, very aware of it.
I think one of the most chilling aspects of this is that here you have a woman just doing everyday things, taking the dog for a walk, things that women do, people do every day. And all of a sudden you have a 53-year-old woman being seemingly randomly attacked and bludgeoned to death. If you can't even take a dog for a walk, where can you be safe? So, there's a lot of heightened anxiety and a lot of fear.
This was shocking not just for Julia's tight-knit community in the tiny hamlet where she lived, but also the fact that, again, she was a member of Kent Police. This was one of theirs who had died, and you could really see on the faces of officers that this had taken a toll on them, and it really did draw national outrage and outcry and a real drive to find who had killed her.
While detectives question those in the area at the time of the murder, specialist officers focus on finding physical evidence.
We had a phenomenal amount of search teams. We had to get people in to assist from other forces. We had 60 to 70 search officers on the scene every single day. Forensic recovery dogs at the scene as well. The public could see that there was a whole sea of blue, and by that I mean police officers. In the initial stages of an investigation, you're really looking for things that are foreign to the crime scene in terms of look out of place that could lead to any identification of who the offender could be.
The specialist search unit undertook a fingertip search of the areas around the fields surrounding where Julia's body was found in order to locate anything that might be of significance, so cigarette ends, drinks, cans, lollipop sticks, articles of clothing, anything really that could potentially contain DNA that would allow us to try and link to someone via a DNA database search.
The experienced search teams quickly uncover a mountain of potential evidence.
I think we took receipt of in excess of 100 items. We did obtain some DNA profiles from some of the items. These were searched on the DNA database and we were able to provide several names to Kent Police.
But with each DNA match comes disappointment. Every lead is a dead end.
What became apparent very quickly is that the identity of this person was unknown. I had no idea who was responsible for this. We didn't have an idea what the motive was. This lady who was out walking her dog on her own and got attacked. And why did she get attacked? Why did she get so brutally attacked?
Then Julia's husband reveals an encounter he and Julia had 2 months earlier.
In the time following Julia's death, her husband gave an interview and he recounted that during her walks out with the dog, she had seen someone acting oddly.
In February 2021, she had identified that person to Paul James when they saw him in that wooded area together.
He was so odd that Julia actually commented that that was a guy that she'd seen before, more than once, lurking around the woods. So clearly Julia James had a bit of a sense that this person could be a danger.
When that information became known to us, we requested an EFIT. Paul provided that EFIT.
It's nearly a week since Julia's murder, and detectives finally have their first real lead in the investigation.
Clearly, the media, the public wanted some answers, and I can hand on heart say for 7 days I didn't have a clue who's responsible.
The police were appealing to the public, anyone who had seen what happened to Julia or knew anything to come forward. There was a £10,000 reward issued by a charity for anyone who could help bring Julia's killer to justice.
I felt that we worked incredibly well with the media. They kept the story going, and it needed that to help us progress the investigation.
The police put out a lot of appeals for any CCTV around here. And I did actually have some cameras on my business premises, and they came and checked all the footage, took what they wanted.
Gavin and his team decide to harness the power of the media and stage a reconstruction of Julia's last movements.
The idea of the reconstruction was one to see if we could jog anybody's memories.
As the police were carrying out a reconstruction using an actress, they were able to sort of show an image of what she would have looked like on the day. She was wearing a pair of black and purple Wellington boots, which were quite distinctive. She was wearing a pair of jeans, a grey jumper, and she had a distinctive blue branded coat.
We were able to buy some replica clothing, and I even spoke to the family and asked if it was possible if we could use Toby. And the reason I did that was simply because people don't always know the owners, but they know the dogs. And that was an opportunity I wanted to explore.
They took journalists around the field to help with a real visual appeal for people so that people could see where Julia had been and really try and jog people's memories. It's not usual to do reconstructions of this nature. It really felt that the police were trying to do everything they could to bring Julia's killer to justice.
The response from the public was enormous. 1,680 people contacted Kent Police with information. We've had about 530 CCTV downloads, dashcam footage, ring doorbells, and it was enormous.
As detectives examine each and every frame of footage sent in by the public, one in particular stands out.
It was days after Julia had been found dead. There was a local gamekeeper and he'd seen a suspicious character in the past and he'd been keeping an eye on him. And the day after the murder, he spotted the very same person wandering around.
At about 10 to 5 in the afternoon, he saw a man acting suspiciously in one of the fields close to the scene of the murder. That man was carrying a bag. Protruding from that bag was a long implement which was covered in plastic bags. Suspicious of that man, the gamekeeper challenged him, and not being satisfied with the explanation that man was giving as to why he was there, he took some images.
The local gamekeeper reported to say that he'd spoken to this individual and he said that he'd been in the area of the crime scene, which was physically impossible because the amount of police resources, there is no way he would have been able to walk through the fields as he was indicating he'd done so.
The man's apparent lies are a red flag to detectives.
The place is swarming with police officers. Whether he's feeling like he's got some kind of a secret and he's enjoying watching them all scurrying around trying to find out who's done this, and he's right there with the murder weapon sticking out of his bag. You know, maybe he's enjoying it. Maybe he's perhaps in his mind goading the police with his presence.
And then when questioned more about it, the individual himself ran off. It was all very suspicious.
It is 10 days since the murder of PCSO Julia James, and police have a potential suspect in their sights.
Some dashcam footage was provided by a gamekeeper. He had challenged the person in a field. He was carrying a bag with a long implement sticking out of it. The gamekeeper thought this man was acting suspiciously and passed a photograph to the police.
The image from the gamekeeper immediately becomes a crucial part of the investigation.
We didn't know the identity of that person. We did have in the incident room the e-fit that Paul had done, and the resemblance was uncanny, and I was quite confident that was one and the same person.
Detectives believe the man stopped by the gamekeeper is the same man Julia James had seen in the woods in the days before her murder. But the decision to release that image to the public in the hope of getting a name is fraught.
First and foremost, it's a big decision to make. I'm not quite sure if they're there as the offender or are they there as a witness. Due consideration to if you're releasing an image of somebody who could be completely innocent. You know, what is the impact on that individual? That could be a lifelong impact. So, you know, it was just something that I knew I had to do. What I didn't want to do, I didn't want to release the whole image, because in that image there was something that could be of significance. There was an item that was protruding from the bag. Was it the weapon that was used?
Concerned that the suspect may destroy evidence, Gavin gives strict instructions on the release of the image.
I want the face released, but I do not want anything to show what was in his bag. I wanted the image cropped.
The investigation dragged on for days and days. It was clear the police were desperate for any information, anything that could bring them a murder weapon, that could bring them a suspect. And it wasn't until 10 days later that there seemed to be a real breakthrough. They put out an image of a man that they wanted to speak to.
We couldn't say if that person was responsible. You know, we were really interested in what that individual was doing there, who that individual was. And then when you connect that to the e-fit, then things were beginning to come together. And that individual was somebody who we really did need to identify.
Within hours, the police have a name.
Callum Wheeler was a 21-year-old local man. He lived essentially in the next village down from Julia James.
He lived with his dad in the Elsham area. The police obviously made huge attempts to try and build up a picture of who Callum Wheeler was.
Very little was known about Callum Wheeler. He'd moved into the area some 2 years beforehand. He kept himself very, very much to himself, even on his mobile phone. You know, lots of people his age have numerous amounts of contacts in their phone. He had hardly anybody. He didn't work. He'd never worked since he'd left school. Yeah, he was a very isolated individual. When the officers attended the house and were directed to the upstairs bedroom where Callum Wheeler was behind a closed door, he barricaded himself behind the door. He pushed his bed to the door. There were two large thuds, and that was something being thrown at the door from inside. The officers were doing their utmost to speak to him in a calm way, to reassure him. Once we were able to gain entry, Callum was positioned in the corner of the room.
Show me your hands. Both hands. Show me hands. Step back, step back, step back. Okay.
He was clearly very agitated. He was swearing at the officers.
Callum. Right. Got him. I've got him. Okay. Calm. Callum, no one's going to hurt you. Nobody's going to hurt you. No one's going to hurt you, okay? Callum, just relax. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Okay. No one's going to hurt you, okay? Listen very carefully. Just relax. Relax. Listen, look at me. Look at me. Look at me. Okay. Callum, just relax. Just relax. Okay. I relax, but I don't want you to bite me. Okay. Just relax. Handcuffs on you. Okay. Relax. Right. Listen very carefully, Callum. What I'm going to say. Callum. Callum. Just listen. I'm going to take my hand away, all right? Callum, are you listening?
You all right?
Hey, we're from Kent Police. Okay, we're not going to hurt you. Who called you? Listen, relax. We're not here to hurt you. We're not. You're safe, all right?
That's it.
God, my blood is flowing.
It's all right.
You're going to kill me in here. No, we're not.
No. He was quite aggressive. He'd shouted at them. He'd said that somebody had ratted him out. And he made a very curious comment saying that sometimes he couldn't control himself. Couldn't control his actions.
Show me your hands. Both hands. Show me hands.
Inside the bedroom, the police found a large metal pole, nearly 1 metre long, 3 kilogram railway jack that's used to jack up railway sleepers.
The pathologist said you were looking for something linear, cylindrical, and really heavy on one end.
Callum. Right, just relax. Callum, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder. Why? Julia James. I haven't done it. You were in the area acting suspiciously during the time of the offence, okay?
Relax.
Calm down. You do not have to say anything. You may harm the offence. Stop struggling. Okay. You do not have to say anything. I'll put this on tighter. Okay. Do you understand me? All right. Yeah? Just relax. Listen to what we're telling you.
News of the arrest spreads around the village.
This has gone on for 10 days, and you've got to feel for the local community, and particularly, obviously, Julia's family, who had had to wait for days and days for some news from the police.
There was a week or two where it was actually quite frightening to be out on your own in the woods, because you thought this person could still be there, they could still be out, and they could do something like that again. I think we were relieved when there had been an arrest. Obviously, you do think, well, they haven't been charged yet, so have they got the right person? Is the person who actually did it still out there?
Okay. Was this my mum who said something? No. I think it was. Someone must have told you. I don't know how do you find out that?
But we're not going to talk. It's not fair for us to talk to you about the offence, okay? Because that's
why am I being dragged into this for? Why?
Just because you were seen in the location at the
that doesn't mean anything.
No. But we need to ask you about that in an interview at a police station.
Dragged into this.
Because somebody's been murdered, somebody's dead, so that's why.
When he's interviewed, he denies being involved in Julia's murder. He denies everything and says he's got nothing to do with it.
He answered no comment to all questions. He did give us what is called a prepared statement, effectively saying he had nothing to do with the murder of Julia James. I remember thinking that we've got the right person. What we needed was more evidence.
So I took a phone call from Kent Police. They'd arrested the suspect. So Callum Wheeler's DNA was then sent to me, and we were able to compare his DNA profile to the DNA results we'd previously obtained from Julia's clothing. So it was apparent that Callum Wheeler could be considered as a potential DNA contributor. One of the results from her Wellington boot, and several results from her jacket. A pair of black Nike trainers were recovered from Callum, and blood was found on both the left and the right trainer, and the DNA profiles indicated that the blood could have originated from Julia James.
Callum Wheeler may be refusing to talk, but the forensic evidence is painting a damning picture.
Kent Police found what was described as a metal bar in his bedroom. So the request was, could we examine this bar urgently for any evidence that it had been used as a weapon. The bar was examined in the Saturday evening. We submitted a number of bloodstains and other cellular samples from the carrier bags and from the bar itself for DNA profiling over that weekend. So that was obviously extremely nerve-wracking. So Monday morning came and several of the bloodstains were matched for Julia James. That was obviously a significant turning point for the investigation. A suspect had been arrested, a potential weapon has been recovered, and it subsequently shows blood from a murder victim on this weapon. So massive, as far as the investigation goes, massive.
We charged Callum Wheeler with murder on Monday the 10th of May. I can tell you an absolute euphoric moment for us all, because we knew that we were going to, eventually secure justice for Julia's family in particular, but also for a lot of colleagues within Kent Police who so desperately wanted a positive outcome with this case.
But just as the case looks to be all sewn up, Callum Wheeler throws in a curveball.
He suggested that the police had planted evidence or it had transferred. And I can honestly tell you, we were all incredibly angry at that point. The suggestion that we would stoop to such depths to plant evidence was absolutely outrageous.
Following the death of PCSO Julia James, police have charged the 21-year-old Callum Wheeler with her murder. But he claims their key DNA evidence is corrupt.
He was trying to present that we'd contaminated or transferred DNA, and we needed to show absolutely that was not the case. And we undertook an enormous amount of work to demonstrate the continuity of the forensic evidence. We were able to say which officers were at the scene, how long the exhibits were at the scene, when they arrived at the laboratory.
Show me your hands.
It was also to the extent of making sure that the team who arrested Callum Wheeler had not been anywhere near to the scene, and we had an absolute watertight case and were able to completely and utterly dismiss his ridiculous suggestion.
Faced with such compelling evidence, shortly before the trial, Callum Wheeler accepted responsibility for killing Julia James, but continued to deny her murder. He said that he was not guilty of murder, but was guilty of manslaughter.
Wheeler is not denying Julia died at his hands, but claims he did not mean to kill her. So it is down to the prosecution to demonstrate otherwise.
The prosecution needs to prove not only that the defendant carried out the killing, but that also he had the intention either to kill or to cause really serious harm to Julia James.
As the trial commences, the prosecution starts to build a picture of Julia's last moments.
The evidence from Julia's smartwatch provided us with a picture of her movements in great detail.
To have an attack in the woods be chronicled on a smartwatch it's not something I've ever come across. And it tracked not just where she was, but her heart rate and her speed. They could tell exactly when she left her house, exactly where she was at the moment her heart rate just soared. And she had 2 massive spikes in her heart rate, and that is the moment she sees this suspicious character, and she sees he's got a weapon, and she tries to make a dash for it. So clearly her attacker caught up with her quite quickly, and he pushed or struck her to the ground. And then there's just a few minutes where she's stationary before the heart monitor stops. Have a smartwatch track the moment her attacker was raining blows down onto Julia's head, and then her heart stops. quite a sobering thought. The only mercy, perhaps, is that she would have been rendered unconscious very quickly. And I think one of the interesting things is when we're talking about devices, Callum Wheeler switches his phone off before he goes out on the prowl on that day, which for me suggests that he had specifically gone out to find and attack somebody. It's not a spur of the moment thing. This is a pre-planned attack, premeditated murder.
Overlaying smartwatch data with CCTV, the prosecution are able to track Wheeler's movements before the attack.
The prosecution case was that Callum Wheeler had been prowling around the woods, lying in wait in the bushes for a woman with a view to attacking them. The police managed to gather together a huge amount of evidence that proved that Callum Wheeler was in the area at the time. Through CCTV evidence, through eyewitness evidence, they managed to track his route to the woods and back again.
On the afternoon of the 27th of April 2021, Julia James left her home to walk her dog. In the meantime, Callum Wheeler was walking towards the scene. He had with him a railway jack. As Julia James walked towards the wooded area, Callum Wheeler was there, weapon in hand. In the time that followed, he was captured on CCTV walking round the area with that jack handle protruding from his bag.
In terms of demonstrating the intent, quite clearly, the amount of blows that Julia sustained were numerous and they were horrific. And, you know, that in itself was demonstrating quite clear intent. We also know that he did try to conceal some blood that was on the ground near to where Julia was. Some grass had been ripped up and then placed on top of that. Again, demonstrating his actions of presence of mind.
Wheeler's intent seems clear, but what of his motive?
The police had examined Julia James's clothes. They carried out DNA tests on her wellies, on her coat, and also on her undergarments. Callum Wheeler's DNA was found not just on her outer clothing, but on her vest and in the breast area of her vest. So he had clearly touched her under her outer clothes on the breast. So that was indicative of some kind of sexual motivation.
It was apparent from analysis of Callum Wheeler's computer that in the weeks leading up to the murder, he had visited various adult sites and had also conducted internet searches, one of which was the word raped. After the murder, he had conducted research into the death of Julia James. So far as motive is concerned, perhaps the more significant pieces of evidence were those following his arrest, because when he was at the police station, he made sexually inappropriate remarks to a female officer and repeatedly tried to masturbate. Whilst he was being held in custody, he also made various comments to staff. He said that his case was different because she was a copper. He said Julia James deserved to die. He talked about the wooded area where this took place. He said you can't go to the woods and expect to be safe. He said that if he was released, he would go back and have sex with women without their consent. He said that because raping a woman would satisfy his needs, that would be justified. He said that he would knock them over to get them to the ground. He said he would then rape them and kill them. He said he would assault females and they deserve to die.
Obviously, the comments that he'd made while he was in custody really underlined what he was really thinking when he attacked Julia James.
When the jury went out to deliberate, it's always in the back of your mind, you know, what happens if it's not the result you expect.
When the jury was sent out to consider their verdict, they were only in retirement for just over an hour.
When the jury had been out and deliberating and coming to their conclusion and they file back into the courtroom and the foreperson will stand in front of the judge, there is certainly a silence that falls around the court. Callum Wheeler was found guilty for the murder of Julia James.
The jury were deliberating for some 72 minutes for a case like this, you know, a really short time. And, he was found guilty quite rightly.
Callum Wheeler was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 37 years. So he will not even be considered for parole until he has served every day of that sentence, and will only be released if he is considered to no longer present a danger to the community. Julia James's family sat through this trial. They heard the harrowing detail of this attack, and they conducted themselves throughout with dignity.
You know, for a case like this, with a family coming along and sitting in the courtroom, it was quite a sort of emotional thing to have to see your partner or your mother in that, you know, terrible situation.
Julia James was going about her own business on the day of her murder. She was walking along with her dog. She had every right to feel protected. She had every right to go about her business and to return home. And that was taken away from her. Every woman has the right to feel safe, to feel protected, to walk without fear of any form of violence. And people like me will do everything we possibly can to protect women and make sure that we take people like him away to protect our community.
However long the sentence is, it's not going to bring back Julia James to her family, to her community, and they're forever going to miss her. But I imagine and I hope that the sentence will have brought some comfort to them that at the end of a very, very long journey, there had been justice for Julia.
I can't explain how much I love her. You have to feel that. You can't tell that in words. This guy's took it away from us. But she'll never leave me.
The body of a female had been located in the grounds of Ley Green Farm. We could see that she had a clear wound to her neck. It was a bloodletting scene. There are no eyewitnesses. There is no CCTV. There's no doors that we can knock on. This is going to be a real whodunit.
There was a fear that there might be this crazed killer on the loose.
The husband has found the body of his wife. Have they had a row that he's actually ended up killing her? We know that she had been married on 4 previous occasions.
She'd obviously had quite an acrimonious split.
Was it a robbery that had gone wrong? Or it could be some random person. You've got a killer who is picking on people with a knife and killing them in broad daylight.
In Hampshire, on the southeastern edge of the New Forest, lies the small village of Bewley.
When people think of Beaulieu, they think of what a beautiful old village it is, quiet and peaceful. It's quite a bright and cheery place. It's lovely.
Beaulieu's very unique. We're surrounded by parkland, and we've also got the river that comes into the middle of Beaulieu village.
Cyclists and hikers are always around, and people do come to Beaulieu just to walk around the town. It's so beautiful.
It's in the New Forest National Park, so we have animals, donkeys, horses, cows, and in autumn, pigs roaming the village.
And they are one of the attractions of the visitors. They like to be photographed standing next to one of the donkeys. When I was growing up in Beaulieu, it was a sleepy village. It wasn't until the 1950s that Lord Montagu opened a motor museum, and of course that started attracting a lot of people.
The houses with the red doors belong to the Montagu estate, and all the other coloured ones are privately owned. A lot of people have lived here a long while.
I've lived in the village of Beaulieu for 30 years. Yeah, we all look out for each other.
It's idyllic. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot where not much happens. As a local reporter, normally if I'm doing anything about Beaulieu, it's about speeding motorists and animal welfare.
I've never come out here at all in my 30-year career to investigate any type of crime, and in particular murder. So around about 6 p.m, I was at home, and I remember my phone ringing, and I knew if I'm getting a call out of hours, something bad has happened. And sure enough, a body of a female had been located in the grounds of Ley Green Farm under suspicious circumstances.
She was found by her husband just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
He had arrived at the scene here to meet his wife, who had been tending to her horses just in this field over here.
He got to the field and he'd seen her lying down with her top sort of half up, and he thought she was sunbathing. And he'd actually walked towards her and gone, "Come on, you can't be sunbathing all day."
But as he approached her and got closer, he could see that she was lifeless. And in fact, there was blood coming from around her neck.
He suddenly realised what he was actually seeing. The shock from something so, get up, stop sunbathing, to suddenly realising your wife has been attacked must have been horrendous for him.
He immediately called the emergency services. Local police ascertained that this was an unexplained death.
The body is that of 47-year-old Penny Davis.
We established quickly, from speaking to the husband, that the victim lived locally in Blackfield, which is just down the road.
When I spoke to Penny's family, it was extremely emotional. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a stranger, so it can't be easy to lay yourself bare and for me to ask, questions about what your mum, what your wife was like. From speaking to her family, Penny Davis was a very loving, hard-working woman who seemed to be very loyal to her family, very supportive to her husband, her new husband. Penny's children spoke admirably of their mother. She was there for everything, it sounds like. A lady who liked to get hands-on with her family, and one of her daughters said if she could be half the mother her mum was to her own kids, then she would be very happy. Penny Davis was a woman who just liked life. She seemed to be in a happy place and enjoyed her horses.
Penny had a job in the local Sainsbury's. She was a mother of 5, and there was nothing unusual about Penny at all at that point. we've got control of the crime scene. You know, we have closed it down, that we have a cordon in place. So when the pathologists initially attended the scene, they did a visual examination of Penny. Penny had a clear wound to her neck. Penny's horses were still roaming around the field. And what the pathologist shared with us was that actually they have had experience whereby a horse has reared up, causing a similar injury to the neck with the sharpness of their hooves. However, I was keeping an open mind that, you know, we need to treat this as an unexplained death until we've had the post-mortem results. So having assessed the scene, we're not afforded with lots of forensic evidence. There is no CCTV.
There were no apparent witnesses to the actual incident itself. With that, it was challenging to establish what had happened.
I remember actually saying to the guys, you know, this is going to be a real head scratcher, you know, this is a real whodunit. And then close to Penny's body, very close to Penny's body, was a car key and a £1 coin next to a pool of blood. So that was significant. And so the obvious question is, well, whose car key is that? And I was told that it was a Skoda car key. Well, what car does Penny drive? I was told it was a Toyota Land Cruiser. But actually we had the husband who had turned up at the scene, and he actually turned up in a Skoda. She'd only been married 3 months. So initially I'm already thinking this could be quite suspicious. You know, the husband has found the body of his wife in a very sort of secluded area. Have they had a row and that he's actually ended up killing her, and now he's making excuses as to how he's found the body? And I couldn't rule her husband out as potentially being a suspect.
When the post-mortem report is returned, it confirms Penny's death is not accidental.
What the pathologists had found was that Penny had in fact been stabbed multiple times.
Penny Davis was ferociously attacked. She was stabbed 13 times. She received 6 stab wounds to her chest and torso area. All of those could have been fatal blows.
It was clear we are dealing with a murder investigation.
Although at this stage details are scarce, rumours of the suspicious death quickly spread around the village.
The police kept their cards very close to their chest. I mean, there were rumours hanging around, but no definite news at all.
I think there was a level of fear among people that there might be this crazed killer on the loose.
We hadn't encountered any crime of this magnitude ever in my lifetime. And of course, when one hears that there has been a murder in our village, one tends to wonder whether the murderer could still be around us, either living in our community or in the fields, woods around. So this was of considerable concern to us.
Nobody knew what had happened. Why should it happen in such a place like this? It's not heard of normally around here.
By now, the village are talking that there's a lot of police activity at Ley Green Farm. You know, they would have heard whispers that a body of a female may have been found. And now we have to confirm that this is in fact a murder investigation and there may be a killer in their village.
In the picturesque village of Bewley, detectives are investigating the murder of Mum of 5, Penny Davis.
Was it a robbery that had gone wrong? Well, actually, when we look back at Penny's car that was parked just at Ley Green Farm there, the handbag was visibly on show, so no one had gone for her car to take her handbag. So we could confidently rule out robbery. So we really wanted to know why this had happened, and more importantly, who had done this.
When it first happened, obviously Hampshire Police were sort of trying to find any witnesses. Of course, this is such a remote area, there's no CCTV. All they had to go on really was a car key and a £1 coin.
One of the lines of inquiry is what's called a victimology. And that is really going through the victim's past with a fine-tooth comb to see if there's any little secrets within their life that perhaps close family members may not even know about. Anything that might help us understand why someone will want that person dead. And this is going right back through Penny's history to find out if she's had any particular run-ins with anyone. Has she been threatened in the shop, for example? When we were speaking to Penny's family, we try and elicit who would want to do this to your mother, who would want to do this to your wife. And the family just couldn't come up with anyone that had a beef with Penny that would want her dead.
But the family do disclose a seemingly innocent piece of information.
Penny had moved her horses from their previous paddock in Romsey to Ley Green Farm.
Penny had only been using Ley Green Farm for the last 5 days. She'd moved her horses because she'd had a falling out with the owners of that stable. So it could be that, the previous stable owners may be involved in this.
If this was a targeted attack, then the killer knew where to find Penny.
We know that Penny had been married on 4 previous occasions. Are they still in touch? Is there a reason why they might want her dead? We found out, having looked at Penny's past, that she had a previous partner who she was together 7 years with. They split up. It was quite acrimonious. They all lived together as a family unit. He had his own children, and obviously Penny had her children. And we know that things weren't always happy within that household.
And Paul must consider one further terrifying scenario.
It could be some random person. If that's the case, that really ramps up the ante, because you've got potentially a killer in the village who is just randomly picking on people with a knife and killing them in broad daylight.
As detectives follow multiple lines of inquiry, house-to-house visits continue.
We established that the local river warden, Tony Norris, was out and about in the area at the particular time.
Tony is someone who's very much works within the community, knows what's going on, is very much got an eye for what is in the right place and what isn't.
And we felt sure that if Tony had seen something, that was going to be crucial.
The river warden's job is to ensure that there are no poachers. So I have to walk up and down the banks probably once a day just to check everything is okay. On the Tuesday afternoon, I left home about 2:45 and was driving past Ley Green Farm, and I noticed a silver hatchback car parked by the bridge. Now, 9 times out of 10, I would have turned round and gone to investigate, but for some unaccountable reason, on this occasion, I didn't. And this was, of course, about the time of the murder itself. I came back about 6:30 with the idea of doing some fishing on the river, and I noticed that this silver hatchback car was still parked there. I became very suspicious at this point because an unoccupied car wouldn't be parked there for such a long period of time unless the person was up to no good. Or possibly, of course, it could have been a car which had broken down and the driver had gone to seek assistance.
Suspicious as to why the vehicle is there, Tony takes a closer look.
I was actually looking to see if there was any fishing gear there. There's no reason for anyone to park on Hertford Bridge unless they were possibly going fishing. And since, of course, it's completely private, I concluded that there's a fair chance that the driver of that car could be poaching. I've got a very poor memory, so I took a photograph of the car showing the registration number, and I could use that in the event of me discovering that it was actually a poacher. I left it at that, and I got my fishing gear out, crossed the road, and set up all my gear. And a few minutes after I started fishing, a garage pickup truck arrived, and my suspicions were allayed that it was nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't very successful with my fishing, so I packed up and went home, and thought nothing more of the evening's proceedings. The police requested that we had a meeting. We sat down in my upper drawing room, and we discussed what I'd seen. I did mention that I had taken a photograph of a car, and it was that they were very interested in. And they said, "I'm going to have to seize your camera."
I was interested because, you know, we had a vehicle that was close to the scene of where Penny's body had been found. So we checked the registration number. It comes back to a local female. She is known to the police, but it's very low level, sort of antisocial behaviour type stuff. The chances are the vehicle has broken down and it's been recovered. So I asked officers to go and speak to the owner of that vehicle.
And it was established that she had lent the car to a local male called Justin Robertson.
So we checked with our police national computer. And Justin Robertson was on our system as a low-level thief. Convictions for robbery, I believe, burglary, a little minor drug dealing and that kind of stuff, but certainly nothing of violence that would suggest that he would potentially be responsible for Penny's death.
When officers locate the vehicle, it appears it has been recently cleaned.
And so you're starting to become a little bit suspicious. But obviously we want to speak to Justin Robertson. You know, why was he in the area at that particular time? Why had the car been recovered? He may well be a witness. He may have seen somebody suspicious coming out of that field. But obviously, on the other hand, he could well be involved in the murder. Justin Robertson was a bit of a nomad. You know, he was a bit of a sofa surfer. And so we were desperately trying to locate him, but to all intents and purposes, he had vanished.
As detectives try to locate the elusive Robertson, Paul is back in the major incident room when he overhears a discussion about the Skoda key found right next to Penny's body.
It was a hive of activity like it is in any murder incident room. And then you could hear that there was a conversation going on just outside of my office between the crime scene manager and a colleague of his. And one of them said, "What car was it that the husband drove?" And somebody shouted out, "Skoda." And then the next thing they said, "Well, but this is a Vauxhall key."
And of course, his ears pricked up because he knew that was the make of the car that Tony Norris had taken a photo of on the bridge over the river that very day that Penny's body was found.
And as soon as I heard that, you know, I was straight out of the office and saying, "What did you just say?" And they said, "The key at the scene is a Vauxhall key. It's not a Skoda key." And obviously I'm then thinking about the Zafira that Tony Norris has seen. And then all of a sudden, you know, that is the key to the investigation. The first thing I asked myself is, well, who told me it was a Skoda key? How did we get to that? I guess the symbols are fairly similar from a Skoda to a Vauxhall. It's an easy mistake to make. But I was kicking myself because one of the first things you're taught is ABC, which is accept nothing, believe no one, and challenge everything. And unfortunately, I didn't do that when I first went to the crime scene. I accepted that it was a Skoda key, and we put 2 and 2 together and came up with 5. And it wasn't until I was told that it was a Vauxhall key at the crime scene that I realised how significant Tony's discovery was.
I think at this point, I think the police really thought they had something to hook onto.
So now, having established that the key next to Penny belonged to the Vauxhall Zafira, that explained why it was being towed away, because the key had been lost. I could only assume that the murderer was driving that Vauxhall Zafira and dropped the key during the attack. And so Justin Robertson, being the driver of that vehicle, he moved from a person of interest to a suspect in a murder investigation. The priority was to get hold of Robertson as quickly as possible and bring him into custody. This is somebody who we believe is dangerous, who may be armed, and who may kill again.
In the New Forest village of Bewley, detectives investigating the murder of Penny Davis have a suspect. Justin Robertson. The key to a car he was driving was found next to Penny's body. But things aren't adding up.
There was no link between Justin Robertson and Penny Davis. So by now there's all sorts of scenarios being played out in my mind as to what has happened here. Has Robertson dropped the key innocently, walking through the field, and then Penny had been murdered afterwards? Robertson didn't really have any previous convictions to suggest that he was capable of this type of violence. And there was no connection between him and Penny, so why would he do this? The priority was to get hold of Robertson as quickly as possible. And so officers were looking at all of his associates, could he be sofa surfing? We were getting warrants, we had firearms teams going through various addresses looking for Robertson, and eventually we came out with a phone number that we could attribute to Justin Robertson.
I think it was police looking through the mobile phone records of Justin Robertson that they realised that he'd made a number of calls to the same number.
Leading up to Penny's murder, probably for about 2 weeks, there was a lot of conversation going on with a particular number. And then as soon as Penny's body had been discovered, all communication on that number had stopped. And so for me, that was really, really interesting. We found that the phone was registered to a lad called Ben Carr. We wanted to know whether there was any link between Ben Carr and Penny Davis. I remember then speaking to the family, do you know these two individuals? One is Justin Robertson, and they looked at me blankly and said, we've never heard of Justin Robertson. And I said, and what about Ben Carr? And then they went, Ben Carr? He was our previous stepbrother. Mum used to be married to his dad. And then, suddenly you're thinking, hang on a minute, we've got a link at last. There is a link between Ben Carr and Penny Davis and Justin Robertson.
Penny had quite an acrimonious split from the father of Ben Carr. Benjamin Carr was Penny's stepson. It doesn't sound like they had the best of relationships from the off, really, which obviously got more and more strained.
We established that Penny had made an allegation against Ben of sexual assault against some young girls in the past. That was investigated and didn't go anywhere, but it clearly caused a rift between Penny and Ben Carr and his family.
Penny and Ben's relationship got to a point, due to allegations made by Penny against him, that he had to leave the house.
He was being ostracised by the family. It was getting a very, very tense atmosphere within that family unit, and so that was a potential motive.
But Penny's family are not convinced.
Animosity between Ben Carr and Penny was years ago. This had all kind of fizzled out as far as the family were concerned. They'd all moved on. Ben was no longer a part of their life. They hadn't seen or heard from him for a number of years. And so we wanted to know, why would Ben Carr want Penny dead?
The pieces of the jigsaw are not falling into place for detectives, and so they dive deeper into Penny's history.
As is usual in any homicide investigation, we do searches of the family home. We seize diaries, laptops and phones belonging to the victim that might give us more information to see who's contacted, the victim. Has there been any falling out with anyone? And lo and behold, what we came across was a conversation between Penny and a female that had taken place on Facebook Messenger. This conversation had taken place at around about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I can only describe it almost as a drunken rant on Penny's behalf. She had reached out to a female who was due to be marrying Ben Carr's father. And in effect, what she had said was that, do you know what you're getting yourself into? Ben Carr has committed sexual assault in the past. I'm going to get him arrested for this. I'm going to ruin your wedding day.
Penny was threatening to go back to the police and sort of renew those allegations against Ben Carr.
So now, having examined this rant from Penny, we could show that there were a lot of things at risk now.
The motive for Ben Carr was to silence Penny Davis once and for all, so that she couldn't rekindle the allegations that she'd previously made.
And when police look at the timing of the online messages Penny sent, alongside the phone calls between Carr and Robertson, there is a clear correlation.
There was a build-up, a contact from the time that Penny had sent this rant on Facebook. We saw the conversation started to pick up between Robertson and Ben Carr, and then the day that Penny is found dead, all that conversation stops. And so it has to be linked. And for me, it's showing a clear conspiracy between these two parties.
It is now 3 days since the murder of Penny Davis.
Day one, we had just a body in a field and very limited information to work with. By day 3, we now had 2 named suspects. We had Justin Robertson and we had Ben Carr, and I had officers out there actively looking for both parties.
Within hours, Ben Carr is arrested on suspicion of Penny's murder.
He didn't kick off, he didn't protest his innocence, he just came in cool and calm, and to my surprise, he went no comment. If you're not involved in this horrific crime, then surely you're going to tell the officers you're not involved. But what he actually did do was provide a prepared statement. It was words to the effect of, I didn't kill Penny Davis, I do know who she is, and I was at the gym that day, and that was it.
Needing to confirm Ben's alibi, police attend the gym where he claims to have been working out at the time of Penny's murder.
And sure enough, officers find that he'd swiped into the gym with his membership card, but not only that, we'd found him on CCTV. Now, the challenge for us was that the CCTV actually put him in the gym at the material time when Penny was being killed. And we knew that even if he had a helicopter, he couldn't get from the gym to Bewley and back again.
Ben Carr was interviewed over several days, and there was insufficient evidence at that stage because of the explanation that he had provided to charge him with an offence.
I had to release Ben Carr on bail. But obviously we've got Robertson still out and about, and what I couldn't have was Ben Carr speaking to Robertson and telling him what information's already been disclosed to him, because that might help him build a defence. And so, I really needed to ramp up the operation to try and get Justin Robertson in.
Hampshire Police launched a huge manhunt to find Justin Robertson.
We had armed officers going around, various associates that may be allowing Robertson to lay low at their address.
The police knew that he had links to a drug dealing network throughout Southampton. They knew people who maybe would be sheltering him. They knew that someone would have information that would finally give Justin Robertson up.
We have information to suggest he was down at Hythe Marina on a boat, and just as we went onto the boat, he had then moved on from there. And so he was just one step ahead of us.
Despite a massive manhunt, Justin Robertson, the man believed to be instrumental in the murder of Penny Davis, is eluding police. And then the investigation takes an unexpected turn.
I got a phone call, and it was from a solicitor who said that they were representing Justin Robertson, and he will be giving himself up that evening.
Well, the police, I don't think they could have possibly imagined that after a couple of days, Justin Robertson would have actually have handed himself into the police station in Southampton. I think that was quite shocking.
Justin Robertson is questioned under caution.
I thought he would probably make the officers work for it, but to my surprise, he began talking straight away.
That day, she lent me the car. I drove it out to Bewley, parked it on that bridge.
He admitted that he had borrowed the Vauxhall Zafira. He admitted that he had parked it up on the bridge.
There's like a house, I think, round here, big house, loads of sheds. Obviously I was having a mooch. You mooch in the daytime to go and have a look for things, and then at night time you go and rob it.
And what he was saying was that I was in the area because I was looking for houses to burgle.
Somewhere between this bridge here and this place out here, there was I thought I'd lost the key. At no point did I see that lady. There was four horses, 5 horses in that field. After I've gone back to the car. Yeah. Obviously I found out I didn't have the key then.
He was trying to be clever, you know, he thought that he could give a reasonable account as to why he was in the area. When you watch him in the interview, he's very chatty, almost cocky.
Some people describe me as a rogue. Some people describe me as a nobody will ever describe me as a murderer.
Robertson made it really easy for us because he had put himself in that car. He could have said it had been stolen, but he was confident enough to say, I was in the area, but I didn't kill anyone. What we then disclosed to him during the interview was actually we have got the key, and it's been found inches away from Penny Davis, who'd been stabbed multiple times. So what have you got to say about that? He then went no comment, because I think he realised that actually, you know, the game was up, he'd run out of lies, and he was charged with Penny's murder.
And then detectives uncover a crucial piece of evidence.
We're looking at Penny's last movements. We've got CCTV of her leaving her workplace, getting into her vehicle, and then driving to Ley Green Farm. And what we noticed, not on the day of the murder actually, but the day before, we could see the wheels of Penny's vehicle. But what we also noticed, that effectively in convoy with Penny's vehicle were the wheels of a Vauxhall Zafira. So we would say that Penny was being followed by Justin Robertson the day before and potentially was due to die that day.
This raises the question as to why the murder was not carried out the previous day.
We now know that Penny was actually with her daughter at that particular time, and therefore we think the operation was aborted as a result of a witness being present.
It's a chilling thought, and in the minds of detectives, it indicates Robertson's premeditation to cause harm to Penny Davis.
Let's say Justin Robertson was in the area at the time and he was going to commit a burglary, and he got spooked by Penny and decided to attack her because he didn't want to get caught for a burglary. This now shows that actually no, this was a targeted attack. Penny was being followed to a location that only a few people knew that she would be going to, and therefore it had to be somebody who knew Penny quite well to say that she works in this location and she keeps horses at this location.
And Paul believes that person is already known to police.
Ben Carter certainly would have been privy to the information of where Penny worked, and so by now it's starting to show that this was a conspiracy and Ben Carr has put Justin Robertson up to it. And so because Ben Carr was on bail, I decided that we would rearrest him, and he was charged with conspiracy to murder Penny Davis.
2 people had been charged with Penny's murder, and obviously we popped that straight on air to let people know that this person had been caught.
As the trial commences, Paul and his team have concerns about the body of evidence they are about to present.
What we don't have is forensic evidence linking Robertson or Carr to Penny's murder. And don't forget, it was quite a bit of blood at that scene. Those jury members are expecting forensic evidence.
It's always a tricky situation when you don't have the forensic evidence in a case.
But things start well for the prosecution.
We get a stroke of luck because, to my surprise, what Ben Carr said was, I do know Justin Robertson, I do know Penny Davis. He said, I'd had a falling out with Penny, she was threatening to disrupt my life, so he agreed to pay Justin Robertson £1,500 to go and find her and warn her off.
He indicated that he had hired Justin Robertson, but not to kill Penny Davis, but to scare her.
And Carr knew what buttons to press to persuade Robertson to do this for him.
Ben Carr stated to Justin Robertson that Penny Davis had abused him when she was in a relationship with his father, but there was no substance in relation to those allegations.
Justin Robertson has this hatred for sex offenders, and that was the ignition that Robertson needed to go off and lose his temper with Penny Davis.
Carr goes on to explain how the man he paid to put the frighteners on his former stepmother ended up killing her.
He says Robertson was wearing a balaclava and that the balaclava was then removed by Penny during a struggle. Robertson then lost it and stabbed her multiple times. But, that certainly wasn't part of the plan. Robertson is the one who's taken it too far. That is nothing to do with me.
It is then Justin Robertson's turn to take to the stand.
He was cocky, he was looking up at the public gallery and winking, and the family are there with Penny. It's the most distasteful thing I've ever seen in a courtroom.
Justin Robertson's behaviour was described by the judge as offensive and a misguided attempt at bravado.
Robertson tries to refute Ben Carr's version of events.
Justin Robertson said that Ben Carr was lying in order to drop him in it and to blame him solely for the murder and to get himself off the hook.
So Justin Robertson's defence was that he'd gone to the field to case the area for burglaries and that he knew nothing about Penny's death, and all of a sudden two supposed conspirators had ended up being absolute foes and they were just throwing mud at each other during the court case.
The prosecution then bring out a witness whose evidence will wipe the smile from Justin Robertson's face.
We had a witness that would testify that Justin Robertson visited her on the evening of Penny's murder.
He said to her that he'd killed somebody. He went into her kitchen and pulled out a knife, indicating that that was the similar sized knife to the one that he had used to stab Penny Davis multiple times.
And actually the measurements were similar, that the pathologist could show it was a knife of that kind of size. Really caused him some issues. So he had nowhere to go to say he didn't stab her, because a witness said that he'd confessed to doing exactly that.
With the evidence laid out in court, it is time for the jury to retire to consider their verdict.
And I start reflecting then on kind of how the trial's gone. Robertson had given evidence. He wasn't a credible witness at all. He was cocky. He tied himself up in knots. But Ben Carr was quite well spoken. He was respectful towards the judge and the jury. He was well polished. Were the jury going to fall for that?
But the jury see beyond Carr's slick exterior.
The jury deliberated for 16 hours and returned verdicts of guilty in respect to both. Carr was found guilty of conspiracy to murder and received a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 30 years. Justin Robertson was found guilty of murdering Penny Davis and received life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 32 years.
I remember Robertson, I think, just shaking his head but smiling, and I think Ben Carr just dropped his head and started weeping. But my eyes were then drawn straight up to the public gallery where I could see Penny's family, who were extremely relieved and very emotional, to say the least.
It all comes down to money at the end of the day. Justin Robertson would do anything for a quick buck, and Ben Carr had said that he'd quite happily pay him £1,500 to murder Penny.
But there is one final twist in this case.
When we searched Ben Carr's house, we actually found a roll of money that added up to £1,500. And when we examined that money, it turned out to be counterfeit. And so it just goes to show what these people are like, the lowest of the low as far as I'm concerned.
So this is the echo of the April the 22nd, 2015. I was then able to read what Inspector Barton said here. It wasn't until we heard about the car on the bridge from Mr. Norris that alarm bells started ringing. He had the sense to take a picture of it. To have a photo was perfect. It pleased me that I was actually able to make some contribution in the successful solving of what is a pretty ghastly crime.
There was a real sense of pride for me and my team having had this result. But what was particularly sad for me was that ultimately we had a husband that lost his wife, we had parents that lost their daughter, and we had children that lost their mother.
And they carried themselves, their family, so honourably throughout that whole trial.
It is not them, but us, Penny's family, who have been given a real life sentence. The life of someone precious to us, a mother, daughter, wife and sister, has gone, and she can't be replaced.
Penny's husband was very emotional afterwards. You know, he loved her so much, and he was broken by this. He found his soulmate, and then she was cruelly taken away from him. And like he says, he will never get over this.
you.